I was able to stack up 42,617 points for damage flying arc enemies during Close Scrutiny on Blue Gate. Now up front, I want to make this clear. While the method that I'm giving you is incredibly easy to do, this specific event and fighting the new Vaporizer plus all of the flying arc enemies is not easy. The method that I use, the strategy that I use, is the easy part. For my equipment, I brought in a few things. A hole cracker with 8 stacks of ammo, a Jupiter with 7 stacks of ammo, an anvil with a single stack of ammo just to help me get to where I needed to go, a snap hook, a photoelectric cloak, some healing, 3 wolf packs, and a couple of light shields. Now for those of you that have been with me for some time, you know that one of my favorite places to do trials challenges is at the Overlook Airshaft on Blue Gate. The Overlook Airshaft is arguably the strongest position on this map for doing a bunch of different trials challenges. You can see almost the entirety of the map from this location, and you have one of the strongest, most defensible positions on the map and maybe even in the game. This specific positioning is incredibly necessary for dealing with the Vaporizers. The Vaporizers are an incredibly powerful threat, and they have a couple of moves that you need to make sure that you have a total amount of cover for. Now, once you spawn in, you want to head for the Overlook Airshaft, and then you're going to be there for essentially the entirety of the match. Now, keep in mind, while this is the Close Scrutiny event, and there is a lot of points to be had from the Vaporizers and the Rocketeers, these smaller arc enemies, the Fireflies, the Hornets, and the Wasps that are flying around are also still super valuable. Don't forget, taking out a Firefly, a Hornet, and a Wasp will give you 1,000 points, and you can do that in about 10 seconds. So don't sleep on those smaller arc enemies either. Make sure you're cleaning those up whenever you can. Now, when you aggro a Vaporizer, you need to make sure that you have a couple of things, and this is why I like the Overlook Airshaft. You need to make sure that you have an entrance and an exit that are on, ideally, 2 different sides of the building. The goal here is that you're going to rotate in and out of those doorways, protecting yourself from damage and also dealing damage to all the enemies. Now, as it comes to dealing with a Vaporizer, the first thing you really need to accept is you cannot ego this thing. It is so strong that the second you allow yourself to take any amount of damage from it, you've lost all of your shields and you've lost a good chunk of your health. The Vaporizer has 2 attacks. The first attack is essentially like a sniper shot. It will charge up its attack and then it will shoot 3 individual projectiles that can deal a good amount of damage to you, but it will not be a persistent beam. If you get hit by a single one of those lasers, you will lose the entirety of your shields and a good portion of your health. The second attack, the more dangerous attack, is essentially the Queen's Laser, where it will charge up its laser beam and then fire it persistently for at least 5 to 10 seconds, creating an area of effect of fire that will burn you and take away all of your shields and health. Now, as it comes to dealing with shield management, you have to understand that you need to protect yourself at all times. You will drain your healing extremely fast if you allow yourself to take any amount of damage from the Vaporizers. Now, you might be wondering why I'm using a light shield, and it's a good question overall. While I know that the medium shield gives you essentially more overall shield, and it does additional damage reduction, in my opinion, if you're needing to rely on a medium or a heavy shield to get you back to a safe place, your positioning is the problem, not the shield type. The shield should be there as an emergency button to help you get to where you need to go when you start taking damage, but the shields are not really intended to keep you safe from persistent, repetitive damage when you're not in a place of cover. So for me, I choose the light shield because I try and make sure that my positioning is locked in at all times, and that if I take damage, I always have an area of cover to go to. Now, in terms of the total difference between damage reduction, this is where I don't really understand running a medium shield in my opinion. A medium shield will give you 42.5% damage reduction, while a light shield will give you 40% damage reduction. It is 2.5% difference on top of losing 5% of your mobility. Not only that, but then using regular shield rechargers does not fill up a blue shield all the way, so you'd have to expend more than one just to get a full shield recharge. Or you could stand in place for 5 seconds and use a surge shield recharger, but in my opinion, it's just a little bit easier to be effective in combat with so much going on, using light shields and just being able to move around as much as you need, and having your shield charge up in the background. Now, I do recommend bringing in a couple of wolf packs if you can. Now, the wolf packs are not intended really for the Vaporizers. It's more for the high volume of Rocketeers that will spawn in. And additionally, you can use your wolf packs to do chip damage against the smaller arc enemies and get all of those eliminations cleaned up. So when you see a swarm of enemies come in, when it's not specifically the vaporizer itself, you can use your wolf pack to essentially clean up all of those kills and get all of those points for the Trials challenge. Now you can wolf pack a vaporizer, it's just extremely hard to do. The way that you would do it is you specifically need to do damage to the vaporizer to cause it to use its shield, and the shield is the same one that you see on top of the matriarch. It will be very visually obvious when it's in its shield, and when it has that shield up, it will absorb 100% of projectiles. The second that shield goes down, you can throw a wolf pack, and sometimes it won't recast the shield right away, allowing your wolf pack to sneak in and deal tons of damage to it. Now, in terms of balancing what you're doing during combat, you need to look at your weapons in one of two ways. The Jupiter is really intended to pull enemies to you until they're within a range where your Hole Cracker can be effective. Or if you needed to get some sort of a kill shot, the Jupiter is usually the one that I go to make sure that I can get that final shot and get that final part of that elimination and final part of those trials points. But in general, what I tended to do was use the Jupiter to hit an enemy and bring them close, and then swap to my Hole Cracker to essentially do the heavy lifting once the enemy was within range. Not only that, but I also tended to use my Hole Cracker for the smaller arc enemies. It's just a little bit more effective to use that because the Hole Cracker is much more durable than the Jupiter is over a long period of time. Now, when the probes come down and somebody begins to breach it, it will spawn in a ton of enemies to protect that probe. Now, essentially what you want to do when all of those enemies come in is you just want to start dealing damage to whichever one is within range. You don't need to worry about which type it is, you just want to continue to do damage to all of the enemies that you can. I tended to focus on the Rocketeers first because they didn't have a defense mechanism that would absorb my damage, but you can make a decision that's right for you. The Rocketeers also give you essentially the same amount of trials points, and you can take them out a little bit faster than vaporizers. So I just tended to focus on the Rocketeers because it was easier to take them out and stack my trials points, and then move on to the vaporizers, which took a little bit more time to get done. Now, in terms of raiders that are involved in the event with you, in my experience so far, I've had more friendly lobbies than I've had not friendly lobbies, but there are definitely players out there that are using this to their advantage and are fighting players when they're focused on fighting the vaporizers. So you do need to be careful and keep in mind that you are taking a big risk when you are bringing in such a high volume amount of weapons. Something that you can do to kind of safeguard yourself against being ratted as best as you can is to play around other players that are also focusing on the PvE enemies. In general, especially in solos, a player that comes in to eliminate other players is doing it by themselves. So if you're with multiple players, it is a lot less likely that they're going to focus on you. Rather, they're going to find this single raider that's off by themselves doing their own thing. Now beyond that, there isn't a ton more to this challenge. At this point, you've seen all of the rotations that I'm doing, and you understand that the idea here is that you just want to stay where you are and pick off any enemy that you can that's within sight. You don't want to overextend, you don't want to be the player that's trying to breach and open the thing. You just want to be the player that's sitting back and sniping players and pulling enemies to you and using your Hole Cracker to deal damage once those enemies do get to you. One last thing to keep in mind is that while it doesn't feel great when you don't get the final blow on an enemy, it doesn't actually mean you've lost points. For whatever reason, for me, anytime somebody took the final blow, I felt like I lost a considerable amount of points, but there were a couple of times when I took a final blow and I checked my score, and it really only gave me the same volume of points that I would get for hitting the enemy regularly. So don't panic if somebody is taking the last shot from you. You're not losing any amount of points, and you're getting the same volume of points that you would otherwise. Beyond that, there isn't a ton more to this challenge. Once you've stacked up enough eliminations and you're happy with your score, head back to Speranza, collect any loot if you haven't already, and watch your score fly up the leaderboard. That's going to be it for me today, y'all. Thanks for watching.